We're going to give everyone a chance to log on and join us before we get started. Welcome, everyone. We're still waiting as people log on. All right, we are going to get started. Hello, and welcome to Hawk Mountain Sanctuary's Stay at Home Speaker Series. Today's program is 2020 Migration Season Wrap-Up with David Barber, Hawk Mountain's Senior Research Biologist.
Hi, Jamie.
Also joining us are special guests, Hawk Mountain volunteer counters, Paul Heverin.
Hi, Jamie. Hi, everyone.
And Beth Sassaman.
Hi, Jamie. Hi, everybody.
Thank you for joining us. My name is Jamie Dawson. I'm the Director of Education at Hawk Mountain Sanctuary, and thank you to everyone in our audience for joining us this evening. As you may know, Hawk Mountain is the world's very first refuge for birds of prey, and we continue to work hard to be leaders in raptor conservation, science, and education, locally and globally around the world. Hawk Mountain is a private nonprofit, and membership is the lifeblood of our organization. To all of our members, thank you so much for your support. And if you're joining us this evening and you're not a member, we hope that you consider becoming one in the future. Hawk Mountain hopes that everyone remains safe and healthy during these times of COVID challenges, and we are so excited to offer our local and global community a variety of free virtual programming. As always, Hawk Mountain greatly appreciates and depends on donations. Just so everyone is aware, today's program is being recorded. The video will then be accessible on Hawk Mountain's YouTube channel as a continued resource. We also have a link on our website directly connecting you to our YouTube channel. At any point during today's program, viewers may submit questions through the Q&A feature on the Zoom platform, and we've designated time at the end of the program to take some questions from the audience. And we are so excited that David Barber, Paul Heverin, and Beth Sassaman are joining us today to share with us summaries and insights from Hawk Mountain's 2020 migration season. And before we go further, I'd like to take a moment to share some of David's experience with our audience. David holds a Master's of Science in Zoology and joined Hawk Mountain in 1999. He is responsible for collecting data in the field, managing our natural history databases, including our long-term raptor, bird, and butterfly counts, and for all sanctuary GIS mapping projects. He also conducts stewardship and monitoring programs, helps in conducting the annual count, and trains interns, particularly in wing tagging techniques and the use of mapping software. David is a talented birder by ear and skilled naturalist who can be found out and about working to complete the breeding bird, butterfly, and other annual surveys on the sanctuary. An award-winning brewer, David is our resident beard connoisseur and enjoys working with his hunting dogs and being outdoors. So, David, you are in charge of managing Hawk Mountain's long-term migration counts, including the longest running raptor migration count in the entire world. What are some of the favorite aspects of this important responsibility?
Well, not only do I manage it, but I'm also one of the counters. So I would have to say that counting, being on the lookout is probably my favorite aspect of it. But also I work with 12 great volunteer counters and get to spend a lot of time with them on the lookout and just sharing the views, the wonder of raptor migration with visitors that come to visit North Lookout.
Awesome. All right, David, how do you prepare yourself for success when you're getting ready to begin a long day out in the elements at the North Lookout, counting every single winged creature that's passing the lookout for migration? How do you prepare for that?
So the first thing you do is check your local weather app and see what's going to be happening that day. And then it's all about bringing lots of food, lots of water, lots of sunblock. and lots of patience, because sometimes it can be a little slow on the lookout.
Gotcha. All right. Well, thanks for sharing. All right. So we're all excited to hear some more highlights that David's going to share from the 2020 season. And then after that, we're going to hear some personal experiences and perspectives from our awesome counters, Paul and Beth, of what it's like to officially contribute to the world's longest running raptor migration count. All right, David, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. All right, thanks, Jamie. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Seems like it's been a long time since we actually wrapped up the North Lookout count, but I'm excited to share with you a little bit of the highlights and the lowlights of our Raptor season, Raptor watch season this past fall. So many of you may know that we've actually been counting here at North Lookout since 1934, the oldest continuous hawk watch in the world. So our 87th year of counting raptors. We count hawks from August 15th through December 15th and sometimes a little after. So that's why we counted on the 27th. We were out there for 118 days, 186 hours, both staff and volunteers. We routinely count 16 species of raptors, and we did this year. We ended up with just under 13,000 raptors this past year. While it sounds like a lot, we actually were about 25% below our 10-year average. But we not only count raptors as they're flying by, we're counting everything that has wings, basically. So we counted over 78,000 non-raptors, which included 139 different species, over 1,000 butterflies of 12 species, and just over 400 dragonflies of 3 different species. So when we look at the migration count in general, counting 16 different species, there's going to be some losers and there's going to be some winners. And these are all winners. These are species that kind of beat their 10-year average. So we had higher counts of turkey vultures, black vultures, bald eagles, Cooper's hawks, American kestrels, red-shouldered hawks, and peregrine falcons. All their counts were beat kind of their 10-year average. And unfortunately, here are the losers. These are species that their migration counts were less than the 10-year average. So Osprey, sharp-shinned hawk, northern goshawks, broad-winged hawks, red-tailed hawks, golden eagles, and merlins all had counts lower than their 10-year average. And then we had 2 species, northern harriers and rough-legs hawk, that were right around average. So let's start with kind of our big 3. The species that we count the most. Those are broad-winged hawks, sharp-shinned hawks, and red-tailed hawks. And broad-winged hawks, we counted just under 4,000 this year. Our high day was 760 broad-wings in one day, which seems like a lot, but the total count was 48% below average, and we usually get 2 to 3 days where the counts exceed over 1,000 and potentially 2,000 in a day. So it was one of those seasons where the broadwing flight never really materialized. And this is, while it's our most abundant species, it's also our most variable species. Broadwings depend really on strong thermals to migrate, and 95% of the birds that fly past North Lookout do so in about a 10-day period, right? In about the 3rd week in September. So if you look at our long-term data, you can see that there's a lot of variation from year to year. It seems like we have a big year about every 5 to 6 years. And when we're counting broadwings, this is what they look like. They're using thermals, they're getting up very high. And so it always helps to have some clouds so you can actually pick out these specks that are really high above you. And unfortunately, this year, we were plagued with a whole lot of blue. There were hardly any clouds during that peak migration period. So trying to look up in the sky with nothing really to focus on, it's really difficult to spot a broadwing. And because there were no clouds, we also couldn't see it was difficult to see very far away. We also had, if everybody remembers those wildfires from out west, we were plagued with really dense haze. And we also had some easterly winds. So these birds are very dependent on what the weather conditions are during that peak. If we get easterly winds, the flight seems to shift to the west. If we get westerly winds, they seems to shift to the east. And so it's off the ridge. So when we looked at the flights at different hawk watch sites through Pennsylvania, so all these arrows are different watch sites in Pennsylvania, and the red arrows pointing down, those are where they had below average counts. So you can see basically the eastern half of Pennsylvania, all the watch sites had below average counts, and almost the two westernmost count sites had above average counts. So very variable, and it's not just because we had a low count this year, it doesn't mean that the species is in decline. It could just be a shift in their migratory patterns that happened this year. Sharp-shinned hawks are our second most abundant species. We counted just under 3,500, but that's still about 15% below average. And when we look at our long-term data, we can see that, starting about in the 90s, we've seen this kind of short-term, or if you want to call 30 years a long-term decline. And we've published research on this back in the 90s that one of the reasons why we're seeing a decline in sharp-shinned hawks is not because the population is declining, but it's because they're not migrating as far as they used to. So these are birds that eat other birds. And if you see a bird eating birds at your feeder, it's possible that it's a sharp-shinned hawk. So we looked at Christmas bird count data, and we discovered that the sharp-shinned hawk populations are increasing during those Christmas bird counts. So the birds aren't migrating nearly as far as they used to. Now, red-tailed hawks, that's our third most abundant species, probably the most abundant raptor in Pennsylvania that everybody sees along the roadsides. They declined as well, about 16% below average. And when we looked at our long-term data for that, we see a similar pattern. So again, when we looked at Christmas bird count data, we tended to see higher counts on Christmas bird count data, and that could be one explanation why we're seeing declining counts at Hawk Mountain. Now, these aren't necessarily patterns that we're seeing all across Pennsylvania, and so just because we're not seeing them, we're seeing declines on our count doesn't necessarily mean we're seeing declines at other counts. And it could be not only are they kind of short stopping, not migrating as far, but we could be seeing some shifts in their migration. So when we look at watch sites across Pennsylvania for red-tailed hawks, we can see that those watch sites in the central part of Pennsylvania had higher than average counts this year, whereas the eastern ones and the furthest west counts all had below average counts. And we did notice that, and Paul might corroborate this, this was my feeling, is that we tended to see a lot more red-tailed hawks early this year than we usually do. It's a species that usually peaks in November, but we were seeing counts, 15 to 20 birds in early September and late August. Now, one species that we know is not short stopping and not migrating nearly as far as they used to are osprey, because osprey are complete migrants. Virtually the entire population leaves the breeding grounds and migrates into South America. And osprey have declined, or were 29% below average this year. And if we look at our long-term data, it really doesn't look very good. Since the 90s, it's been a slow, steady decline. And just in the last 10 years, the count has dropped about 6% per year. And when we look at watch sites across Pennsylvania, this is an unfortunate trend that all the counts had below average counts this year. And if you looked at population trends in the East across all watch sites, there is only one watch site that has shown a positive or an increase in the population or the counts at their watch site, and that's Cape May. Everything else is virtually either declining or has an non-significant trend. But enough about the losers, those species that had below average counts. Let's talk about some of the winners. Bald eagles, one of everybody's favorite raptors to see at North Lookout. We counted 559, which was a new season-long record. The counts was up 35%. We actually had a day with 32 bald eagles seen, which is our third highest day ever. And that included 18 eagles after 6 o'clock at night. So birds were really on the move that day. And that was, I think, the second week in September. And if we looked at the trends from our counts, if you look the DDT era, DDT was banned in 72. And you can see the population kind of slowly increased and then really took off. And now, when I started in 1999, the record count was 200, and now it's just under 600. So a remarkable comeback for the bald eagles. And if you looked at trends or what the counts were like all across Pennsylvania, it's all blue. So all above average counts this year. One of the other success stories are Peregrine Falcons. We counted 83, which doesn't sound like a lot, especially when you compare our numbers to Cape May, but it was 32% above average, and it was our second highest peregrine falcon count ever. And we actually had a day with 15 peregrines, which is our third highest day ever. And if we looked at the trends, we see kind of a similar pattern with a lot more variation than we did see in the bald eagles. But when you're up at Hawk Mountain, you don't just count raptors, we count everything. So I want to touch a little bit on what else we're counting up at North Lookout. And I wanted to start with kind of our top 5 non-raptors that we count. So our most abundant non-raptor and most abundant bird are Canada geese. We ended up with just under 16,000. And going from there, second most abundant were common grackles, then red-winged blackbirds. These are 2 species that migrate in large flocks, headed north to south past the lookout. Cedar waxwings and American crows was our 5th most abundant non-raptor. Now, there always is some kind of species of note, some exciting species, and I'm sure Paul and Beth may talk about some of their highlights that they had this fall. But we had 3 sandhill cranes that were spotted in December. Which is the birds on the left. The bird in the middle is a Blackburnian warbler. And if you've never been to North Lookout in late August, early September, it can, right after dawn, it can be a fantastic time to see migrating warblers and other migrating songbirds first thing in the morning. Usually lasts about an hour and a half. And this year, August 30th, we counted 281 Blackburnian warblers. Just literally waves of warblers moving through the vegetation along the side of the lookout. It was absolutely incredible. And that was a one-day record as well. Now, the bird on the right, obviously, probably people know it as a blue jay, and they're like, what's so special about a blue jay? Well, blue jays actually migrate, and we counted just over 3,100 blue jays this year, including one day where we counted 515 in one day. And that was a day where it was socked in with fog for half the day. And that's, we could hear them moving past, but we couldn't count them because we just didn't know how many there were. So vastly undercounted that day, but we still managed 500. But I think really the non-raptor story of this season was the incredible flights of eruptive winter finches. Here we have red crossbill, white-winged crossbill, evening grosbeaks across the top, and then lower left, common redpoll, and then pine siskin. These are species that when their food abundance is very low in the wintertime, kind of erupt and move south. This was probably the best flight we've had for some of these species in about 10 years. And actually red crossbills, that was the highest count that we've had in the last 30 years at the least. So that's kind of just a little bit of a summary, a wrap up of the raptors and non-raptor highlights and lowlights. But I did want to quickly thank both the staff and our great crew of volunteers that help us spot all these birds and other winged creatures, as well as the people behind the scenes that are entering the data and proofing the data. So thank you to them. And with that, I will stop sharing.
David, thank you so much. That
You're
was
welcome.
so awesome. I really enjoyed it. And we had a wonderful surprise during your presentation. One of our counters joined us, Rob Feldman. We're so glad that you're joining us. So welcome, Rob.
Thank you. Glad to be here. I appreciate being included.
Absolutely. We're happy to have you. So we loved hearing all of these highlights and summaries from David. And now it's time to get inside the minds of some of our awesome counters to find out what is it like, what motivates you to be involved in the count. So Paul Heverin, we're going to start with you. So I think you might be muted, so make sure that your microphone is on. So Paul, how did you become involved in Hawk Mountain's migration count?
Yeah, thank you, Jamie. Well, my family always came up to Hawk Mountain once or twice a year. It was like a pilgrimage for us as kids. And I guess about 6 years ago, I got interested in it more. And we went to one of the volunteer information nights that Hawk Mountain hosts. And I was very, very shy at the time, but my mom really pushed me to go and ask Dr. Laurie Goodrich if they might consider me for a volunteer counter. And they said yes, of course. And that asking and getting the courage to ask was what got me started as a volunteer. And obviously I've been learning more ever since then.
Wonderful. And so Paul, if you don't mind sharing, how has being a counter at Hawk Mountain impacted your life?
Well, the great thing about it is, first of all, the counters at Hawk Mountain really helped me to improve my skills at identifying, especially the Sharpshin and Coopers, which I think a lot of people can relate to as a tough species pair.
That can be tough.
Especially David and the other counters helped me a lot with those. The other thing I would say about being a counter here is it really gave me an understanding for and a love for sharing the migration spectacle that we see. I'd always enjoyed seeing it, but I learned how to really interact with visitors and to not just teach the visitors, but also learn from the visitors. And I just love the everyday interactions that I have and the surprises that are up there. And I think it prepares me really well for interacting with people and sharing the love of nature.
Oh, that's so nice. Thank you for sharing that. All right, last question, Paul. What is your personal favorite highlight from 2020 season?
Well, I have to admit, I didn't have a ton of great raptor days. I know that David mentioned the broadwings were a little bit disappointing, but I had a great time with the winter finches. And especially, I can remember the morning of October 24th was really special for me because it started out as one of those days where it was totally socked in with fog, couldn't see a thing. But as soon as I got up to the rocks, I could hear the pine siskins and purple finches calling everywhere. It was just, I was surrounded by their calls. And as the fog began to clear around 10:30, 11 o'clock, we could see flocks of them going by. And then a cold front whipped through around lunchtime. And as it came through, all sorts of strange birds began flying by. We had Canada geese, we had ducks mixed in going by, a late great egret passed by, and we had a great busy afternoon raptor flight with several hundred of a great variety of our raptors. And probably the best one for me was as the sky was clearing at the end of the day, we had a white-winged scoter fly by, which is generally a sea duck, and it hadn't been seen at Hawk Mountain in over 50 years.
Wow, that is so cool. That was a great day, man. I felt like I was out there on the mountain with you in the morning. I was in a moment of Zen. So thank you for taking the time to share all that with us.
No problem.
Thank you so much. All right, Beth. Beth, what path led you to become a volunteer counter at Hawk Mountain?
Well, I went to Cedar Crest College in Allentown, and I have a degree in biology from there. And while I was there, I found out that they had offered some field biology courses at Hawk Mountain, a handful of them on raptor migration and field ornithology. And so I took a number of those courses. I started with one and I really, really enjoyed it. And so I took all of them. And when I finished college, I wasn't sure what to do. I was looking to do field biology, but you know, I didn't have a job. So I thought, let's look for internships. And I was accepted to the internship program in the spring of 2001. And I really felt at home at Hawk Mountain. So much that I was offered an internship in the fall of 2001, and I took that as well. So I was an intern twice. And it really, I don't know, I really felt at home, and I really felt like I found my place. So when my internship was over and I moved on, I went to graduate school. I decided to come back and be a volunteer counter because I really feel like I belong. Like Paul said, we have a great community of hawk watchers, both volunteer counters and the folks that come to the lookout on a regular basis. So that sort of brought me to being volunteer.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. So Beth, what inspires you to go outside all day, brave the elements? And we know that it can be frigid sometimes at North Lookout. So what inspires you to withstand all of this for an entire day, to be out on the lookout, counting every single bird that goes by?
Well, I would say that any day that you're on North Lookout is a good day. You get to sort of, the setting really takes you away from, everyday life and the hustle and bustle that we all get sucked into. And you can really take in nature kind of on its own. And that is, it's really a draw. And I really enjoy helping visitors sort of develop that love of nature, and also that love of the spectacle of raptor migration, and showing them things about our unique landscape. I grew up very close to Hawk Mountain, and it's sort of something that I never thought about until I took these courses and did work there. So I really feel like making that connection with people and sort of showing them what's in our backyard and what we're missing that flying over our head is really, it's really inspiring. And so it doesn't matter to me if I'm getting rained on, or if it's, 95 degrees and we're sitting in the baking sun. I would go up anytime to spend that time on the mountain.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much. And Beth, where did you grow up?
Just outside of Kutztown.
Okay.
So in Berks County.
Gotcha. So Beth, what is your most memorable experience from 2020?
Well, I have to say my most memorable experience is missing the only rough-legged hawk, because I left the lookout to use the restroom.
Oh, no.
So, but because we're team players, I wrote that rough leg down on the paper, even though another staff member saw it and not me.
Oh. How could you have known? How could you have known?
Somebody always has to leave for something rare to come in. So I also had a great day. It sounds funny, but I spent a morning standing in the rain with a hawk counter that hasn't counted for a while. And we caught up and we talked about memories on the lookout, and we waited the rain out. So even though I didn't get to see a lot of birds that day, it was still, like I said, it was a nice experience. And I also, my very last day was the day I missed the rough leg, but it was also really good red shoulder day. And that is a bird that sort of always fools me a little bit. And I always feel like I need to see more of them. So I got that opportunity, which is something that, that's always good to see a bird that you're not, always super confident identifying.
Nice. Well, thank you so much for sharing that, Beth. All right,
Sure.
Rob. Thank you, Beth. Rob, what motivated you to become involved as a counter for Hawk Mountain?
Well, I didn't get motivated and become a counter as much as I kind of backed into. I got drawn into it more than being the impetus. I had a pretty high pressure job back before while the Earth was still cooling, and I honestly don't remember when I first started coming up, but it would have had to be just as an escape to hike, and I had a bit of an interest in the avian world, but mostly I think I was just first captivated by the view and just that place. I mean, I think everybody who spends much time up there will tell you that it's their happy place, and it's certainly mine. So I was just one of those guys who got kind of captivated by that air show, as Paul very aptly called it. And David he probably doesn't remember, but I was probably, you hear the counter say, "Oh, it's just a speck, that tiny little speck." Well, that's a, whatever it is. And I would go, "Yes, sure, you just made that up." but then the bird flies by, and that's what it is. And I started just trying to sit as close to the pit as I could and hear as much as I could and learn as much as I could. And I thought and I still have this kind of inferiority complex. Like I'm not like a real, because it just kind of happened. And then one day in the spring, I was up there and Lori, Dr. Goodrich, who managed the whole count at the time, asked me if I could possibly help because, we get these trainees from all over the world. And especially in the springtime, they often don't have a lot of raptor knowledge in particular. So Lori said, hey, Rob, since you're up here anyway, would you mind hanging out in the pit? And maybe, you can volunteer and you can help them with their raptor IDs. And I promptly, immediately, just very naturally, spontaneously said, well, who's going to help me? Because I don't think I really, but, the staff doesn't take that lightly. So that's how I backed into it. So that was in 2003, spring of 2003. And I've been.
I would say, rest assured, if Dr. Goodrich asks you to help out for the count, I think she has confidence in your skills. So that's a compliment.
Yeah.
Well, what do you think are the most rewarding aspects and most challenging aspects of being a counter at Hawk Mountain?
Well, a lot of the challenge is just keeping up with, especially the species that you don't see all the time. And your brain, you want to make that ID, but you don't want to make that ID, if you're not right on top of it. So there's always this tension between, and it ties back actually to the most rewarding part. I mean, and this will go to kind of my special moment too. What about this season worked for me so well? But when I first started to be a counter, and it was, of course, it was weekends. Everybody's there on weekends, and then my situation changed. The other thing that happened in 2003 that got me involved was I call it being gainfully unemployed. I did a lot of freelancing for 3 years, but my full-time position went away, and I just got that much more involved up at Hawk Mountain. And I thought, I'm available on weekdays now. I don't have to deal with, 400 people on a good Broadwing day. And then I learned about school groups.
Oh, yes.
Which at first was, was somewhat distracting, but I very quickly got really into that and realized that was so much a part of the mission that I now engage as much as I can with the the school groups and the visitors and just in general. And that's in just interpreting for the visitors and doing that. So that's another tension there. The challenge of it is because a lot of the people who come and sit near the pit want, as soon as I see a bird, I'll say, oh, there's a bird over, out here on your left. And then, what is it? So I say what it is. And then the guy on my right, who's really there to get better and doesn't want, shush, would you give me a chance? So that's the tension, is to kind of hit that balance between, all the different goals. Some people are, especially in the school groups, usually key on like the one little group of kids who are just, involved, and the other ones are way more involved in their lunches. And
Right. Well, thanks for sharing. So is that like interacting with, the school kids and other groups? Was that your highlight from 2020 or was there something else you wanted to add?
Well, tied into that, yes, because, particularly this year, of course, there was doubt. We didn't even have a spring count. So there was doubt. And then, of course, relief when we were able to do the counting that we did. And Todd runs the steward, they call it stewardship, basically all the operations. And they put their heads together in order to be safe for us and safe for the visitors, built this, I don't know what you call it. It's basically a railing that provides some spacing, but it's, rustic enough and it's not imposing. So and that enabled us to continue to do that. So yeah, I mean, of course it was somewhat restricted. Instead of having pairs of counters, we could only be in the pit individually. But that was my takeaway, was just what Todd and all the professionals at Hawk Mountain did to preserve this tradition. The traditional part of it is important, of course, as well as the science for these 85 plus years. So
thank you so much for sharing that. And I think Todd might be listening right now. He might have just heard you share that. So that's very meaningful.
Hi, Todd. I very sincerely meant everything I said, though. That's what it's about for us.
Wonderful, wonderful. It's so good to hear. So thank you all for sharing. It was wonderful. We have so many questions coming in. And before I dive into the questions from the audience, David, if there are other people who are interested in becoming a volunteer counter at Hawk Mountain, what advice do you have for them?
I would say just come up to the lookout and sit by the pit. And of course, let us know that you're coming. All the counters are very generous. They're also very modest. The ones that are here, they're a lot better than they think they are. So pick the brains of the counters, and that's really the way to learn, I think, is just learning from somebody else who has that expertise. So we're always happy to have other people that are interested in volunteering to count at Hawk Mountain.
Cool. Thank you so much. All right. So many questions. Okay. First question is about Kestrels. I was surprised to see that Kestrels were up in your count. Any thoughts on this given their declines generally?
Well, there's always going to be some variation from year to year. And we are lucky in this year that we had an above average count. We really don't know why they're declining. There are several reasons that people think they might be. We know that when we sampled blood from all the Kestrels in the area, they all have West Nile antibodies, so they've been exposed to West Nile. We also know that Cooper's hawks will prey on Kestrels during the winter time, particularly males that are in suboptimal habitat. But there's also some reason to think that it might be something on the wintering grounds. In some areas that the birds coming back from the wintering grounds aren't as heavy as far as mass goes as they used to be. So there's lots of ideas out there, and Hawk Mountain is actually starting this large collaborative multi-state project on American kestrels to try and answer exactly these questions. Where we know that they're declining, where are the birds, where is the mortality happening? Is it on the breeding grounds, on the wintering grounds, or is it during migration? So.
Right. These are important questions. You mentioned sandhill cranes. We had a question, where are the sandhill cranes coming from?
That's a great idea. With most of the birds that we see at North Lookout, when say, where are they coming from? It's north of us. So we know that they breed north of us and in Canada. We also know that they breed in Pennsylvania. So the birds that we saw, or I didn't see, what another staff saw, were 3 birds that soared up high and were basically flying north to south. So somewhere north of us is all I can say.
That's a valid answer. Okay, we have another question. Why do I still have a few blue jays at my feeders if they migrate?
It's a great question. So likely the blue jays that you're seeing now are not the same blue jays that you were seeing in the spring and the summertime. So they are they undergo what's called chain migration. So the populations north of us may migrate down to here, and the populations that were here in the breeding season are migrating south. So it just kind of moves like a chain.
Thank you. When did the eruptive winter finch flights begin, and how long did they last?
Well, I think our first siskin was in August, late August. We also saw some purple finches in late August. And then I know Paul was out on a breeding bird or a winter bird survey last week and had red poles. So they're still around. I haven't heard much about evening grosbeaks. We're still getting purple finches at the feeder at Hawk Mountain. So there's still birds around.
All right. We have a question from Todd. our director of stewardship. So David, do scientists think there could be a relationship between decreases in osprey and an increase in bald eagles since they are share habitat?
Yeah, that's definitely one of the reasons people think there's a decrease in osprey. Bald eagles will, they'll compete with each other, but bald eagles will kleptoparasitize osprey, so they'll steal the fish from an osprey. So yeah, they're sharing the same sorts of habitats. So I would imagine that could definitely be a reason why we see that decline in osprey.
By the way, I love the term kleptoparasitize. I'm going to integrate that into conversations moving forward. That's great.
That's a good Scrabble word too.
Yes, definitely. Okay. Are you counting based mainly from how each bird looks or depending on other characteristics such as flight pattern, height in the sky, quantity of birds appearing together, or a combination of all these things?
I would say yes to all of them. So it's really, when we see a bird flying, a lot of times we go by the jizz, so which is general impression, shape, and size. So it's flight pattern, if you can see the plumage, the color of the plumage, what is the shape of the bird? How is the bird flying? Is it soaring? Is it soaring on flat wings? Is it soaring with a dihedral? Does it have long wings, short wings, long tail, short tail? But that, and if it is flying in a flock, that kind of narrows it down as well. So, and then also just the distribution. If you see a buteo soaring out there, chances are it's not a rough-legged hawk because we only see one of those a year. It's probably not a Swainson's hawk because we only see one of those every 5 or 6 years. So yeah, it's narrowing it down using all of those factors.
Great answer and great question. Next, we have a question from Astrid. I'm curious to hear a little bit more about the spring migration. What are the peak dates for which species, ospreys in particular?
That's a good question. I will say that our spring migration isn't nearly as good as our fall migration. The fall migration, the birds are concentrated along the ridge because they're using updrafts, and we get predominantly northwesterly winds, which creates those updrafts. In the spring, the way the ridge is oriented northeast southwest, we really don't get those updrafts, and birds are really moving in a broad front from south to north. So while we average 18,000 birds in the spring or in the fall, we average about 1,800 in the spring. And we also start the spring count later than birds start migrating before we start the spring count, simply because our trainees arrive later. So the peak days, I don't know for sure. I'd have to get back to you on that, but I know the ospreys are probably, we start our count April 1st. Osprey are probably peaking mid-April, I would guess, mid to third week in April. But it's certainly, you could see them basically anytime after April 1st.
I could add a couple things to that, David.
Sure.
I know, well, obviously we were in lockdown this spring, so I did a hawk watch from my yard.
That's right.
And I saw a big peak of especially ospreys and sharpshins. A big variety came in mid to late April, around, I'd say the 10th to the 25th or so. And the broadwing hawks peaked really quickly in that window too. And then it was very interesting in mid-May, almost mid to late May, I had a huge day of bald eagles. I ended up with 19 that passed overhead. So the migration definitely is peaking in April, but it can be going in March and May too.
Thanks, Paul, for sharing that. So the next question we have is one that I often get doing education programs at Hawk Mountain and particularly on guided hikes. How do you make sure that you don't count the same bird twice?
That is one of the top 2 questions we get at Hawk Mountain on North Lookout. So we are looking kind of up ridge. If you look behind Jamie in her screen, that's where we're looking when we're counting birds. So the birds are coming from in front of us and passing by on either side. So we have an imaginary line that once those birds pass then we'll count them. And there are certainly species and individuals that will turn around and fly back up ridge. And if that's the case, and we know for sure that's the same individual, then we will delete that bird from the count. But it's really the behavior of the bird. Birds tend to not dawdle around very much. They tend to be flying in a fairly straight line, kind of southwesterly direction along the ridge. And that's why we count them. So we do see lots of turkey vultures all the time. And most of those birds we don't count, because turkey vultures, when they migrate, have different behaviors. They fly higher, they often fly in flocks, and they just kind of set their wings and stream straight by. They don't rock a lot like you see the resident vultures doing.
Yeah, and it helps to keep in mind, when I field that question, which I and all the other counters do, like David said, multiple times a day, it helps to remember that, scientifically, what we're after is you could think of it as a survey, not so much a census. We're not trying to count, we know there were exactly 17 red-shouldered hawks. Year over year, you compare the data, and as long as your methodology is consistent, the data set is defensible. That's what it's about.
And you said such an important word, consistency. Just scientific methods in general, it's all about being consistent. So, all right, we still have more questions coming in. All right, best place at Hawk Mountain for spring warbler migration viewing.
The best place is actually at the base of Hawk Mountain in the state game lands, down in the pine swamp. So the valleys are going to green up quicker than the top of the mountain. So that is usually where I go for my warbler migration, is in the pine swamp on the Berks County side, right at the base of Hawk Mountain in the state game lands.
And I was looking at my planner because we have for our program, it's either April 30th or May 1st or May 2nd, we have warbler walks. And I think at least one or two of those walks will be at the Pine Swamp. So check out our website and our calendar of events for that if you want to participate. Okay, last question. Are Hawk Mountain non-raptor counts logged in Ebird?
Yes. Simple question.
That was it.
So yes. So we when we come down off the mountain, one of the things that we do is we enter our data into Hawk Count, which is a place that stores hawk watching data. And then that gets pushed into Ebird, and then we go into Ebird and put all of our non-raptor data in as well.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. David, Beth, Paul, Rob, what a wealth of information and heart, so much heart and passion. Thank you. And Rob, when you mentioned when you first started, before you considered yourself a counter, and you would be like, a speck in the distance, and how could they identify it? These guys, it's like a superpower. I admire you all so much. Your skill set is amazing, admirable. I'm envious, and it really is a superpower in my opinion. So way to go. Thank you all for sharing. I really enjoyed hearing your perspective. So thank you so much. Thank you to our audience for joining us. We love to connect with you virtually, if not in person. So thank you. As always, I'd like to share some upcoming programs we have. We are open every day. Our visitor center is open. Check out our website for modifications for health and safety for COVID. We have our Winter Artisan Series collaborating with the Arts Barn every weekend, every Saturday from now through the end of March. This Saturday we have Half Moon Macrame workshop, so check that out. Saturday, February 6th, we have an Owl Prowl. Thursday, February 11th is our next stay-at-home speaker series, and that is So What is a Raptor? With Dr. J.F. Terrien. And then we have Homeschool Happenings Nesting Now on February 16th and 17th. And then finally on February 25th, Sanctuary Storytime, The Mitten. So we hope to see you all again soon. Thanks so much. Bye for now.